Hi, Timothy Carlson here, and if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know that I like to do ranking lists and things like that, but today we're going to try something slightly different. There's an organization that's been around for roughly a decade or so called the RockGodz Hall of Fame, and this organization is devoted to giving credit to people in the music business that maybe aren't the most mainstream people or that would be recognized by other institutions. There are so many organizations out there that are trying to be alternatives to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Let's face it, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has failed. I mean, they're putting all these artists in that aren't rock musicians or have any connection to rock whatsoever. So I'm glad to see groups like this trying to do their own thing. They've done several, the RockGodz Hall of Fame has done several induction ceremonies over the past decade or so, and I've attended several of them. I'm glad to see that they really think outside the box and give credit to people that might not get recognition elsewhere. So for this video, I'm going to list 10 people that I think should be in the RockGodz Hall of Fame. This is in no particular order. I'm not ranking them or putting them in any sort of priority order. It's just 10 people that I think would be worthy additions to the RockGodz Hall of Fame. I also want to stress that this list is my opinion only. This is not endorsed by the RockGodz Hall of Fame. It's strictly a fan list and so forth. So let's go ahead and get started. First name on the list, Penelope Spheeris. Might not be an immediately recognizable name, but if you're a fan of music, you're somewhat familiar with her work, even if you don't realize it or not. She famously directed the Decline of Western Civilization series of music documentaries, but then she also directed several narrative films back in the 80s as well, including Suburbia and Dudes. In the early 90s, she directed the first Wayne's World film, which is probably her most successful mainstream movie, and then she did a few other mainstream Hollywood movies as well. Penelope Spheeris has been a trendsetter, even if you don't hear her name thrown around a lot. And that's just because she really got music when I think a lot of other people didn't. It's kind of funny, when her first Decline of Western Civilization movie came out, you had all these people accusing her of ripping off MTV, but it was actually the other way around. She definitely belongs in this organization for her contributions to the world of rock and roll. Next name on the list is Mr. Udo. Mr. Udo is a really famous Japanese music promoter, and pretty much every time you read any book about any band or rock star touring Japan, there are always references to Mr. Udo. It doesn't matter what you're reading, whose book it is. If a band goes to Japan, or you're even reading like the liner notes of a CD or a vinyl record, Mr. Udo's name always comes up. When it comes to bands going to Japan, he's the first name you hear, and perhaps rightfully so. Honestly, I don't know a whole lot about this guy, but the fact that so many bands give him shout-outs and so forth, I think that says a lot right there. To be honest, I'm not even totally sure if he's still alive, but either way, I think his contributions to the world of rock and roll, in particular rock bands going over to Japan, gives him a deserved spot in this place. The next name on the list I have is Danny the Count Coker. This guy, of course, is probably best known for his show on the History Channel, Counting Cars, but he also owns the Count's Vamped Rock Bar and Grill venue here in Las Vegas, which has easily become my favorite venue over the past decade or so, booking all kinds of rock and metal acts. And he himself even sings as a musician in his own band, Count 77. Additionally, he's well known to people out here in Las Vegas because even long before all of this, he portrayed horror movie host Count Cool Rider on one of the local stations that his family owned. Danny is a guy who's made many contributions to this town as far as its rock music scene goes, both as a venue owner and a musician. And you don't really see a whole lot of people that excel at both, but this guy absolutely deserves all the recognition that he can possibly get. He'd go great in the RockGodz Hall of Fame. Not to mention, several of the past ceremonies have actually been held in his venue. Next name on the list, Eddie Trunk. Eddie Trunk has been doing the rock and roll thing for, 4 decades? He's a TV show host. He's a DJ. He's a radio host. The guy is everything in between, too. He's devoted his life to spreading awareness of rock music, getting it out there to the masses, and a lot of people discover a lot of bands because Eddie Trunk turns them on to said bands. I'm no exception. I couldn't begin to name how many bands this guy has turned me on to over the years. And of course, probably best known for the long since canceled TV show, That Metal Show, that so many people would love to see make a comeback. Particularly its Stump the Trunk segment, which remains a fan favorite. Going down the list, next name on here is Jason Green. Jason Green is well known in Las Vegas for being the longtime manager of the band Sin City Sinners, but he has also performed as a musician with the spin-off band Sin City Rejects. Furthermore, his contributions go one step further. He has raised untold amounts of money for all kinds of charities that are near and dear to him, largely because he's been affiliated with a lot of people that have been stricken with a lot of these illnesses and diseases. What this guy will do to raise money for charity really speaks for itself, and the fact that he's been a great band manager, not to mention musician, really says a lot. Next name on the list, Jim Johnston. You might not know this name, but I assure you, you've heard the guy's work. Back in the 1980s, we really started having a rock and wrestling connection, and Jim Johnston, I think, is one of the guys that really played a major role in that because for over 3 decades, he was the WWF's principal songwriter, or as it's called now, WWE. But anytime you heard a piece of music on any sort of professional wrestling that they were putting on, there's a pretty good bet that Jim Johnston wrote it, composed it, performed it, or at least had some role in it. The guy's contributions are undeniable. I mean, whether it's background music, wrestler entrance music, just go pick up one of those albums that the WWF put out back in the day, or just, again, watch a video of any one of their old wrestling matches. This guy's music, if you're a fan of wrestling, or even in some cases just plain rock music, it's something you can't escape. Next name on the list, Ainsley Dunbar. This guy has played drums for everybody. Back in the 60s, he was with John Mayall's Blues Breakers. He went on to play with musicians like David Bowie, Jefferson Starship, Journey, UFO, Whitesnake. The list goes on. If there's a rock band that you listen to, or you're a fan of a lot of bands, odds are that Ainsley Dunbar has played in at least one of them. He was even supposed to be the drummer for the Jimi Hendrix Experience, but he lost the coin toss to Mitch Mitchell, and of course the rest is history, but I think he carved out a pretty good niche for himself over the years. Next name on the list, Brian Slagel. Brian Slagel is the founder and the man who continues to run Metal Blade Records. Metal Blade is where a lot of all your favorite metal bands got their beginnings. He's also the one that arranged and put out the first Metal Massacre compilation, which was the first appearance of an officially released Metallica song, but then it also featured the likes of artists like Rat, Steeler, Black and Blue. The list goes on, and he released several of those compilations over the years that gave a lot of bands their beginnings. I'm glad to see this guy is still going strong, doing what he does best, because he's a name in the world of hard rock and heavy metal that absolutely should not be neglected. Next name on the list, and this is kind of a similar story, Mike Varney. Mike Varney is the guy that founded and has continued to run Shrapnel Records. Shrapnel is another label that's really been integral to hard rock and heavy metal performers. He introduced the world to a lot of the virtuoso shredders back in the day. He's widely credited with being the person who gave Yngwie Malmsteen his first break on a major international level. And again, he's active to this day. I mean, he produced the Steeler album, which was Yngwie and Ron Keel's old band. But then, going back to Danny the Count Coker, who we saw on this list earlier, he produced the Count 77 albums, which Danny sang on. And it's good to see this guy is still out there, alive and kicking, still going strong. And the last name on this list, David Plastic. You see a lot of talk about rock photographers, but Usually you see like Mark Weiss, Niels Lozauer, and Ross Halfin. Seems like it's mainly like those three guys, but the work David Plastic did taking photos of bands is every bit as iconic as what those more known names did. This guy's body of work speaks for itself. If you do a Google search for his photography, he took photos of any band that was anyone back in the day, and his work really is some of the best that's ever been taken by a rock photographer. It is a shame that you don't hear his name talked about more often because, again, I absolutely love the work this guy does, and he truly captured a bygone era that we'll never experience again. And those are my 10 picks for the RockGodz Hall of Fame. All people that aren't necessarily musicians, but have played a major contribution in the world of rock and roll or heavy metal and continue to do what they do best. Are you familiar with anyone on this list? Is there anybody else that you would add to the list? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel for more content because I'm always posting new videos. And be sure you give this one a like if you found it helpful. I'm Taylor T. Carlson. See you next time.